3, 4.
We just live right now, man. It's going down, excited for the season. You know, we coming off a playoff win. I mean, you know, we had a couple wins.
Hey there, guys. This is Riley, one of the usual co-hosts and producers of Diaries, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast presented by us, the staff of Brew Hoop. Wanted to jump in real quick before this episode gets going to give you a bit of background on it. I was able to interview Van about a week ago going through our season preview series. The interview ended up going pretty long, so what we decided to do is to split this one up into two parts. You will get part one on Thursday, and we believe you will get part two the following day. You can check out both on our Brew Hoop's YouTube page. We'll have an article up on Friday that brings both of them together, but I want to give a bit of a context here before you get going. That way it doesn't just cut off in the middle of nowhere. I'm just going to go find a spot somewhere about halfway into the interview to break it up into two, and we'll talk again soon. Hello, and welcome to Dear Diaries, a Milwaukee Bucks podcast presented by us, the staff of Brew Hoop. Take two of this podcast. Technical difficulties aside, we're back with another edition of the season preview series. My name is Riley Feldman, one of your usual co-hosts. Happy to be joined this evening by a special guest. All my guests are special, but this one's extra special. He's sort of my boss, my volunteer boss. He's the site managing editor of Brew Hoop. It's Van Fayaz. Van, context for the people at home, we're recording here tonight, September 14th, a Saturday. I quoted to you the score for the Alabama-Wisconsin game. It was 6-10. We already talked about how the Gophers put Nevada, Mountain West Titans, Nevada to the sword 27-0 today. So we're all in a great mood tonight. I'm really happy to catch you on this evening of all evenings. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, despite, like the technical difficulties with my laptop and the technical difficulties with my alma mater's football team. It's a Saturday evening, and we are two males in our 30s, well past the age of whatever, like the drinking age or whatever age you get to when you want to start doing things out in public and like enjoying being an adult. But yeah, look at us. We're like two taken men on a Saturday night, just having a drink and chopping it up on a podcast about basketball. It's like,
that's exactly right.
This is what our lives have become.
What age?
Instead of being with our significant others, we're doing.
What age did you give up that lifestyle? So, like for me, I really was never about it. I was
never in it.
Okay, all right, okay. So we could have been doing this a decade and a half ago, and it would all.
Yeah, I was never truly in it. I was the type of dude, like in college, all the bars that would have like lines out the door, I was happy to go to those during the week. Like, you were in Dinkytown. For us, it's like State Street University. Like on the weekend, I didn't really want to go to the Nitty Gritty or Wando's, like when there was a giant line, especially if it was in the winter. It's like, yeah, I'll go there on a Tuesday night to have a drink at like 9:30, and then I'll go home. So never was really about that life.
Yeah, why would you be when you could be at home watching Ersan Ilyasova absolutely crush double-doubles?
That's what I was doing.
As the team would lose yet another game.
That's what I was doing.
Where else would you want to be? Yeah,
that's what I was doing during my college years. I was coming home on a Saturday night and watching the Bucks play the Hawks. That's exactly right.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, in that case, we know that you have a depth of expertise about the Milwaukee Bucks, past and current, which is why we have you on. We're going to continue this series of interviews. You're the latest victim of it. We're inviting everybody on the Brew Hoop staff and also guests from beyond to go through a series of standard questions to set the table for the 2024-2025 regular season and beyond for the Bucks. Just to have a chance to compare and contrast, see where everybody's feeling, concerns, excitement, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we'll just get right into it before we eventually get to the miscellaneous, a return segment for all the longtime listeners. You know what's coming. But I'm going to start here, Van. Simple question. Who's the new Buck you're most intrigued by going into this season?
Simple question, but I, of course, will give a very long-winded answer. Now, as maybe you've noticed about me, and just I think something I think I've thought about myself in general, listening to this great podcast series you have going, Riley. Like this is fantastic that you're doing this. Like we've got we've got everyone on the site involved. We have former writers of the site. Like Mitchell is still a part of us. I don't care what he says. He's still
in
a
our
part
heart.
of it.
In our heart,
No,
and he's literally in the chat. He has a byline.
Yeah, not even in our heart. No, he's still on the masthead. He's still around. Like I'm not letting him leave. And, and then our some of our friends from Locked On Bucks and some other former writers who have maybe moved on to bigger and better things, and maybe some other people from around the Bucks you'll see in the coming weeks. So I'm just some hack who's in the middle. But it's great to be on, and it's great that you're doing this. But I've been enjoying listening to everybody's answers to these, like Jackson you had on this week, and then you had Morgan earlier this week. I was enjoying listening to those, and I know it's like I'm going to be saying things that other people have said, or I'm going to be saying answers other people said. I'll maybe say some things that are different and some things that are, just repetitions of what other people have said, which is fine. I'm not necessarily concerned. Like, this is one thing about me. I'm not necessarily concerned with like being unique or having like the most novel take, or like something that's just like,
I was going to say, would you describe yourself as a take artist? You're not coming in here trying to be a take artist per se.
I'm really like anti that. I'm just more I'm more concerned about having like the best answer rather than the most unique one. So I'm going with Gary Trent Jr. for this one, and I'll tell you why. I'm also going to say that I'm very intrigued by DeLon Wright, but we'll talk about him a little bit later. And with Trent, there's a lot to like about just his presence on the Bucks. For one, like I think this is something that a lot of people are overlooking. This is happening certainly in the national media, who I want to say, like when Trent signed on the minimum, which is a huge coup. Like, I mean, just I cannot understate how much of a masterstroke that is to get him on a minimum. Like, the Bucks have gotten their starting 2 card on a minimum deal a lot in recent years, like Wesley Matthews, Malik Beasley, obviously. They've done it on the cheap, and that's fine. But this Trent is, I think it's not a stretch to say he's the best 2 guard that Giannis has had ever in his career. I mean, like look at the other. I mean, okay, so you think about all the point guards he's had in the last several years, but I would say you have to go back to, like you may be going back to very early years of Giannis to find. I think. I mean, it's like who like there aren't many
out there.
There aren't many great choices. I mean, like you could say Brogdon. I guess Brogdon was a combo guard. He was kind of towards the end of his tenure in Milwaukee was the starting off-ball guard. So maybe him. Before him was Tony Snell, who was great in some ways, but obviously wasn't shown up on the box score. Like a great defensive player and could shoot the 3, but we like to rag on him for the zeros. And then prior to him, you're talking guys like OJ Mayo or so Gary Trent Jr. is, I mean, he is just entering his prime.
Yep.
He has come off a number of good, really impressive statistical seasons with the Toronto Raptors. Now, only one of those teams he played on in Toronto was a playoff team. He was in the playoffs just 1 year. And I think a reputation precedes him as he comes to Milwaukee, certainly. I think he's gained like some notoriety in recent years as a bit of a chucker, which I think we're going to find out how much that's merited or if it's not. I think there's a school of thought where it's like, all right, he was playing on a pretty bad Toronto Raptors team the last few years, and he was for most of the time the probably third option on that team. Like maybe even when certain people were hurt or after the Pascal Siakam trade or something, like he's kind of their number 2 scorer, and that's a role that's maybe not he's not well suited for. It's just a little bit big for his britches. So he comes to Milwaukee with that, but also his 3-point percentage is very good. Let's not get it twisted. And I think when you look at guys who shoot like a decent volume from 3 like he does, and maybe aren't the most efficient, but still are they fill it up, and their conversion rate, their success rate from deep is very good. You think about them as kind of one-dimensional players. There are a lot of I think when I talk about how the national media is sort of underrating this move, I think I see it from some Bucks fans too, where they're saying is he better than Malik Beasley? He's much better than Malik Beasley. I haven't even gotten a defense yet, but Gary Trent Jr. is more of a. I mean, I won't say he's a 3-level scorer, but I will say he's a 2-level scorer. He's not sensational at the rim, but he's better than Malik Beasley. He's better than Dante DiVincenzo was, who I guess is someone I shouldn't have left out in that listing of the Bucks starting 2 guards, just because he really was only that guy for 1 regular season. And yeah,
we'll be hearing from Adam. Don't worry. Continue.
Right? Yeah. So he's a good mid-range shooter. He can score from all places on the floor. All right. So we talk about him as a chucker. Is he a bit of a ball stop? Yeah, probably. Although I do think he has some ball handling chops. He maybe is dialing his own number. He was dialing his own number a lot in Toronto. But again, his usage rate was pretty high. I was looking this up when I was writing about his addition. Typically, he was in the upper, to the mid to maybe upper. I don't know if he got in the upper 20s, but he was certainly around 25% usage rate throughout his tenure in Toronto. Historically, the 5th starter, or the off-ball guard, since when we're talking about the Bucks, since 2018, this current contention period for the Bucks, that's usually what I'm using as my frame of reference for timing here. That 5th starter, that off-ball guard, usage rate's typically been around 15%. Grayson Allen, Dante was maybe a little higher one year. Certainly Wesley Matthews and Malik Beasley. These guys are out there to spot up and shoot. That's been the classic role for that player, and that's something that works in the starting lineup next to Giannis. This Bucks starting lineup has always been really good with whatever player it is out there, despite whatever that guy's limitations are, just because of the 4 players around him who are great. I mean, we saw it last year with Malik Beasley, but those players do often play very well in those contexts, on their own, with their own merits too. So I think the question with Trent offensively is, does he become a more efficient player as his usage decreases? That's generally what happens with everybody. As you are a bit more of a complementary player, and you're not trying to, run a team's offense by yourself, you're going to be more efficient. So I don't necessarily think we'll see a huge statistical year for Gary Trent. And I do also think because he's in a contract year, he just got a minimum deal. He wanted, reportedly, they were saying he was seeking $25 million in free agency, which that was not going to happen. And Toronto put something to the effect of 15, maybe it was 15 to 18 million, or maybe 18 million was what he was making last year, I believe. And they put 15 on the table. He said no. So he's had to settle. There's going to be some motivation for him to, perform and secure a nice new contract. But that's probably, it's, I don't know if it's going to come from, that new contract for him will come from great numbers on the stats sheet. It'll probably be more from his fitting into the team and the team having a lot of success. Now, defensively, okay, when Nick Nurse was the coach and Adrian Griffin was his assistant, we saw the Raptors playing this like havoc style of defense, which was well suited for their personnel. They had a lot of young and long guys. I mean, you looked at their roster in those years, it was like Fred VanVleet, and then about 10 guys who were between 6'5" and 6'10", who were all like, in their 20s, and had really long arms. So they could generate tons of turnovers, tons of deflections. Gary Trent Jr. was in the 2 years that he played under Nick Nurse he was top 5 in the league in deflections each time. Now, last year, all those numbers and his steal numbers, which were always very good, they took a hit because Darko, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, their new coach, came in and installed a more typical brand of NBA defense, which, it sort of reminded me, I think, of like, it's like when we went from Jason Kidd to Mike Budenholzer. It's like there was a defensive scheme that worked with some players, but then it stopped working after a while. So you go back to basics, and it maybe doesn't look as flashy, but it might be better. That's not to say that Toronto's defense is any good, but that's sort of what it was. And so the box sheet, the box score numbers, the stat sheet numbers were not there as much defensively for Trent. However, in like just watching more video about Trent, and we had Chelsea Late from my compatriot from Raptors HQ. She's my counterpart there, the managing editor there. And I, by the way, encourage you to check out her work on the Raptors there, but also at Swish Appeal, who's the SB Nation WNBA affiliate. She writes a lot of great stuff there. So she's all over the WNBA right now. But she was kind enough to answer a bunch of questions for us about Trent. And a number of the things I learned, like about him defensively, he's 25 years old. He's got the athleticism. He's got good size you want from a guy on the wing, like especially playing the two in today's NBA. His lateral quickness is really very good. That's something that makes a huge difference with on-ball defense. Maybe even if he doesn't have like the greatest instincts, like if he's not, Drew Holiday out there on the perimeter, he does have the tools. He does have the foot speed and just the instincts, and is in the right place, I would say. Even if he's and he's a little bit bigger than some of the other guys that the Bucks have had on the perimeter in recent years. We really you talk about like Allen and Dante and Wesley Matthews, Malcolm Brogdon, all these guys were like 6'3", 6'4", and like some of them, good defensive players, at least average. All of them, I would say. And Trent is probably more average than good, but I think can be, I think he can be a neutral defensively. I don't think that's at all out of the realm of possibility. And I think it's also not out of the realm of possibility that he is maybe the Bucks' fourth leading scorer next year. Like, I think he could overtake Brook Lopez on the hierarchy. And I do think there will be a lot of times during the season where they're going to need him to fill it up. Like there are nights that Chris Middleton is not in the lineup, whatever is going on, or they just have stretches during the game where it's like, all right, Gary, we need you to go to work. You got to cook. Because like they will, I think, run the offense through him, because that's something he's shown he can do. Maybe you don't want him being that guy for long stretches of the season or in important games, but to get through 82 games, I think there will be a lot of opportunities for him to do that. I think it's going to benefit the Bucks to have someone out there with like second unit lineups like him who can isolate and score effectively. So Trent is the dude, definitely.
Okay. I think so. When you were talking to Chelsea, did anything come up about how like his navigating screens and everything? Because that was another component of like the Malik Beasley experience, is that it just didn't happen. So when that didn't happen, it was like, okay, and there are obviously a lot of other issues with the defense, not just Malik Beasley, but did that come up at all? Because I have a feeling that will be part of the component in whatever lineups, whether it be the starters or if they try to do some switching lineups and things like that?
I don't recall if that was
okay.
something she mentioned, but if I don't recall it, it probably suggests that maybe that's not something he's known for. I mean,
yeah,
we'll have to see, like, screen navigation, like who on the Bucks right now is good at navigating screens. The Bucks for years, they were going over them. They would dip under them in kind of the early years of Bud, and I think we've seen them be more switchy in recent years, and there will be lineups where we had that piece that ran last week, and you've written a lot about just potential lineups we'll see from the Bucks this year, about just like how these 5-man groupings can do in certain situations. And a lot of the lineups I was thinking about, and the lineup I wrote about, it's like these are lineups maybe you want to switch more than the Bucks would have done in years past. So even if you're out there with even if you have like Damian Lillard and Chris Middleton out there, and you worry about so and so getting switched on him, like I was having a conversation in the comments the other day. It's like if you're playing the Celtics and you have one of the Jays switched on from, let's say you have DeLon Wright out there or Taurean Prince out there, and they are marked up against Tatum and Brown in whichever combination.
Yeah.
And either of them runs a screen with whoever, ball handler, Derek White. Is it a bad thing necessarily for them to be switching on to Middleton rather than like a smaller guard like DeLon Wright? I guess he's somewhat sizable for a combo guard. He's about 6'5", but I mean, at least they'll be switching on to size in those situations. I think that's just a better outcome than just making Chris Middleton stick with Jason Tatum, or something like that. I'd rather have him switched on to him. That's my point.
Yeah. And we were really spoiled, obviously, by Drew Holiday and how great he was at navigating screens. So
yes.
It's hard to compare that to literally anybody. So it did not help that it went from Drew to Dame and Malik, and it was kind of a little bit of a shit show most nights, but it is what it is. Okay. Next question for you. Young buck with 3 years or less experience. I could have said 2 years or less because I don't think anybody qualifies with 3 years on the roster. Who will have the greatest impact on this season? Your core group, from assuming not the two-way guys, are AJ Johnson, AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr., Chris Livingston, Tyler Smith, and of course, last but potentially least, Marjon Beauchamp.
It's, as much as I'd like it to be Andre Jackson Jr., there's just he and the other guys I think are too buried on the depth chart. It's a boring answer, but I'll say AJ Green. Looking at who you have on the wing, because all of these guys really, with the exception, I guess, of Tyler Smith, and they will play some on the wing when they're out there. Certainly, maybe AJ Johnson will be running point, but he'll probably be off ball too when he's out there sometimes, especially if he's out there with like Damian Lillard. But Green was really the main guy who gained Doc Rivers' trust last year. Obviously, it was interesting because like AJ Green was not playing much at all under Adrian Griffin. Like he. Certainly Marjon Beauchamp and Andre Jackson Jr. were playing. But when the coaching change happened, those guys, we didn't see them much at all. And we saw AJ Green kind of almost immediately. Don't know why that is necessarily. And Green did distinguish himself. Not so much in the playoffs. He did not shoot the ball well at all in that first round series. But, he had moments of, I would say, he had moments of very solid defense. Like think about that game against Philly, that fourth quarter. He did some great work on Tyrese Maxey.
Game against the Mavs. He had a great performance against the Mavs on the road. I remember quite clearly having a great defensive performance in that game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's the norm. Like
no,
maybe those are like 100th percentile outcomes for him. Because there were definitely a lot of moments for him where it's like he was clearly getting lost with his assignment. You know, he was getting destroyed by screens. I remember seeing that I can't remember the game, but just, you know, he was out there a lot and just getting completely thrown out of plays, and his man would just be all alone, like above the break, teeing up a three. So that's just, I think you can chalk that up to inexperience. But can AJ Green be an average defender? I think it's possible. I don't know if I'd bet on it. I think he is not a terrible defender. I don't think I think he's a better defender than Malik Beasley was. So, but the thing is, it's like you look at who's going to come off the bench behind the projected starting five. Obviously, you have Portis, DeLon Wright, Torian Prince, the new guys. Pat Connaughton will get some run, to the consternation of many, but there is, I think, a case to be made for him getting some playing time early in the year, if only to recoup his value. So maybe he can be a salary matching piece in a trade. But we'll see about that. I think, you know, certainly like they could trade him next summer more easily than they could this summer for sure, and probably during the season. But all those guys are going to be in front of Green to start the year. But as the year goes on, you know, there will be some injuries. There are going to be nights where someone isn't available, and those will be nights for AJ Green and Andre Jackson, and hopefully some Chris Livingston, maybe probably some Marjon Beauchamp too. He's another guy I think, like, yeah, maybe he'll be getting some playing time to the consternation of some, because purely to recoup some value after
the showcase special. We'll call that the showcase special. Yeah.
Please take this guy off our hands. Kind of thing. Yeah. So that's why that's really the only reason why it's Green. I think he's going to be first in the pecking order out of those guys. But I do think Andre Jackson Jr. I think he will have some good moments this year in those in between games, like midseason games where they need to rely on him for a lot of minutes. I do think we'll see him like take some steps forward this year as a defender. I mean, I think just being in the being in the league a year, and now having some stability on the coaching staff with him, and maybe some tips from veterans. I do think the foul rate will come down, if only just because it's hard for it to be higher than it was last year. So I think he'll have a lot of moments this year that will keep us intrigued for years to come. I certainly like him a lot. So
yeah, say it with me. You know what kind of game you're thinking about when you say Andre Jackson Jr. is gonna. Let's say it together. February
Tuesday
road
night,
game.
February
Tuesday
in
night.
Charlotte or
Washington or
Detroit. Certainly Detroit. Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
there we go.
It's always a Tuesday night. It's on the road.
It's the weather could not be worse,
we can't say Orlando anymore. We put Orlando in this conversation at our own peril. Like they could, they're not a play-in team even. They're like a legit playoff team. So it's basically, the usual suspects of Washington, Charlotte, and Detroit, and then we can add Brooklyn into that this year. I guess maybe Toronto.
There's a lot of candidates to fill in for Orlando's shoes. They're huge shoes to fill. I mean,
Exactly.
maybe the biggest shoes to fill in NBA history. But
Hey,
I think there's a lot of teams that are willing to do it for sure.
I'm sure a lot of those teams would love to, go the route of the Orlando Magic in the last few years. So
just be god awful for a decade and a half and then hire John Hammond. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
they had a couple playoff years.
That's true. We'll get into that. Yeah, we'll get into.
And
that.
now they're an up and coming team. So
it's true. I find it I think AJ Green is the obvious answer. I agree there. I find it very interesting that we went from, and still to be proven, we'll see how this season goes, but we went from like, man, we really got to hope Marjon hits or we are SOL as far as young guys. And now we're in a position where it's like, okay, AJ Green is interesting. Andre Jackson Jr. is interesting. Chris Livingston from Summer League Ball, we'll see if it translates, is interesting. The AJ Johnson, not going to give. Don't want to put the cart before the horse for John Horst, but for somebody who constantly gets ragged on for the travails in the draft, I find it very interesting that we've pretty quickly reloaded. Especially, I think was AJ Green undrafted, I believe.
Yeah, he
right?
was an undrafted free agent.
Undrafted
They got
guy.
him a two-way. Yeah.
And Chris Livingston, obviously, we had to deal with him, but he was Mr.
Last
Irrelevant.
overall.
So,
Yep.
So very interesting. That's just want to put a little pin in that for people to keep an eye on. John Horst redemption arc. Here we go. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I mean, I think you have a whole bunch of young guys. Like, the more you have, the more likely you hit on one of them, right? No, I do think that there's in this bunch there is at least one future rotation player, which that was not really something we could have said for any Buck draftee between Jabari Parker and I guess like Dante DiVincenzo would have been the only one after that.
There was. I mean, after Dante, it got dark. It was.
But to be fair, there weren't many first round picks in those years.
There weren't.
There was not a first round draft pick made by the Bucks between 2018 and 2022. So
yeah. All right. There we go. Next question for you. And this is the one I want to set you up because you finally got your white whale. We'll call you Ishmael. You got your white whale. I want you to rank the new free agent signings in this grouping. It's going to be DeLon Wright, Taurean Prince, and Gary Trent Jr. on how well they will fill the role they'll be given this season. And so this is an interesting question because you had rightful high praise for Gary Trent Jr. I'm going to be curious how you rate this and kind of the role. I think we all have a sense of the role they'll have, but the way that you'll kind of spin it yourself.
I mean, it's my white whale, DeLon Wright, because I have for many years when I've done like off-season preview articles before free agency or the trade deadline, he has been every year like, this is a guy the Bucks should think about. And
folks, a little peek behind the curtain. It's not just the articles; it's constantly in the chat. It's a lot of
really,
DeLon
it's
Wright
that
talk
much.
From Van. It cracked me up when we finally got him. I was like, Van got his guy. Here we go.
I mean, he is. He's definitely my guy. I didn't realize I had like extolled his virtues that much to the rest.
He made us all believers. So I hope he pays off your faith.
Oh boy.
In him.
Oh boy. Yeah. This is. I didn't realize that there was so much baggage attached to it. But okay. So yes, let's talk about these free agents. And I mean, I can't say a whole lot more about Trent than what I already did. But I mean, I think is a starting two guard in the NBA. Like he would, I'm not going to say he'd start for, every team in this league on like, I mean, maybe, it depends who they have or whatever, but on a fair number of teams, he would be on a fair number of teams. He'd be good enough. Yeah. You'd be their starting two guard. And certainly like, I think he fits very well. Like, okay, we can talk about how he's, he played with Damian Lillard for like a year and a half, maybe. I'm sure they have some relationship. As I think you had said, that's not nothing. But it's
also been a long time, and it was a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's not why I think he's going to work. I think he's going to work for a lot of reasons. And again, as a minimum guy, like you can't do better. I will have an article coming out this week about both him and actually it's something I've collaborated on a bit with our friends over at Bright Side of the Sun, the SB Nation affiliate in Phoenix, about him and Tyus Jones, who they will also agree, like the national media is not talking enough about how much that addition means to the Phoenix Suns, who desperately needed a point guard and some creation last year. And they got one of I would say the best point guard at just like taking care of the ball. I mean, the assist to turnover ratio, it's one of the best in NBA history for Tyus Jones. Those are huge signings for both teams. And yeah, just not being discussed. Both of those guys, minimums, they're both going to hit the free agent market next offseason, as we've said. The Bucks are, unless Trent really wants to like do the sweetheart thing that Bobby Portis did, which is, re-sign for like, he doesn't have an option. Like Bobby had an option they could opt into, but it'd be like stick around with non-bird rights and then re-up on a new contract with early bird rights next year. I really don't think that's going to happen, and it would be very expensive. I do think, however, there is a possibility that Trent sticks with the Bucks in 2025, 26. And that's because here, I have a visual aid for this.
This is the part while he's prepping himself. Folks, switch over to the Brew Hoop YouTube channel if you haven't already, if you want to see the visual gag that goes along with this bit. Continue.
Yes. So many in Wisconsin will be familiar with the brand Palermo's Pizza. Fine purveyor of frozen pizzas. You can find them in your local grocer's frozen section. They are quite good, but a Wisconsin company. And for many years, they have been sponsored with the Bucks. I don't know if they still are, but with some of their pizzas, they just, you could get a Bucks apron with maybe some purchases. So I have not one Bucks apron, but I have another one because, I bought a bunch of frozen pizzas. So I put on the first apron, and now here is the second apron. Bucks are over the second apron above the luxury tax, and that's why they could only sign free agents to minimum deals this offseason. They faced all kinds of other restrictions too. However, and the Suns are the same way. I don't know if they have an apron thing, but if not, whatever enterprising frozen
pizza maker, local pizza maker,
in the Valley of the Sun should get on that. I think next offseason, though, one of them is certainly coming off. Oh, that took out one of my earpods. So next offseason, with Brook Lopez's contract and coming off the books, as well as potentially if Bobby Portis, Chris Middleton opt out, then maybe, just maybe, the Bucks are no longer dealing with any aprons above the luxury tax. However, if they are above the first apron, I think it's possible, perhaps likely, that again, assuming they will be just a first apron team, which I think is how it looks now, probably will happen. They'll have access to the full mid-level exception, which, let's see, next offseason, projecting to be about $14 million. Could that be enough to keep Gary Trent Jr. around? I'm not going to rule it out. We'll see how this year goes. Anyway, it's not about Gary Trent. So he's that first guy in terms of how well he fits his role.
He's got number one. Okay, sounds good.
DeLon Wright. Let's talk about my guy now.
Mm-hmm.
So DeLon Wright is, I think he's 32 years old. He's been in the league now. I think he was in that 2015 draft. I remember actually seeing him play for, is it Arizona or Utah? He went
Utah.
To?
It was Utah.
It was Utah. That's right.
Yeah.
I saw him. I was in Portland many years ago, and there were some NCAA tournament games there, and I remember seeing Utah and Arizona and Ohio State were some of the teams I saw. I remember seeing Jakob Poeltl and DeLon Wright. Anyway, so that was the start of my.
I was going to say I didn't know the lore went this deep.
I didn't realize it either until just there.
Right now,
maybe it all goes back to that fateful day,
uh-huh.
and I think it was March of 2015 at the Moda Center. But he's had a reputation. He's been all over the league too. Like I don't know how many teams he's played for now, but it's probably he's a great one to use an immaculate grid. For he's Detroit, Dallas, Washington last year. He ended up in Miami at the end of last year. The Raptors, the Grizzlies. I know he's been everywhere, and he's going to spend at least part of the year, hopefully the whole year, with the Bucks. But it's interesting, I think, that he hasn't been able to stick. He was drafted by the Raptors. That was the place he played the longest because he has a lot of what teams would really like. I guess that's why he's always in demand. Like he was bought out by Washington last year, and then the Heat quickly snapped him up. And I've heard this a bit from people around, like, Celtics fans and just people talking about the Celtics. He was pretty pesky in that first round series last year. Dealing with maybe Jaylen Brown would tell you the same thing. He's got great size for a guard. I think he's just got a lot of chops defensively that will be, a huge boon for the Bucks. So he's obviously, taking over the role that Patrick Beverley had last year. But he's a comparable player to Beverley. He's a bigger and younger version of Beverley. I think he offers a bit more offensively. Like, I don't know how much we're going to see him necessarily in second unit lineups, like running the offense, because that's a lot of times been Chris Middleton's purview.
It's rare there's anybody off the bench that gets that kind of role, unless, of course, there's mitigating circumstances.
Yeah. It's happened in years past. Like, Campaign was doing it last year, and
Campaign was getting up shots, is what he was doing.
Yeah, but he was bringing the ball up the court. That's kind of what it comes down to, because like no one likes everyone complains when Chris Middleton brings the ball up the court. Like, he's a great facilitator, but like, he's not the greatest dribbler. Fine, he's a great passer. But yeah, like, we'll probably see DeLon Wright doing some of that, but is he going to be kind of the floor marshal? Probably not. Just because, I don't know, there haven't been a lot of, like, George Hill, DJ Augustine. I don't know. It just hasn't happened so much in recent years that the reserve point guard has been like a true point guard who really can, like, set the tone.
You'd be going back to like Jared Bayless if you wanted to.
Yeah, maybe
deep with it for real.
We don't have. There's no TJ McConnell or Tyus Jones or like Monty Morris running this team. So, but that's okay. I think like he's pretty versatile, because we'll see him a lot alongside Lillard, which I think is great, because he is now their top point of attack defender, which is something that the Bucks did not have until Patrick Beverley showed up. And I do think that for all of Beverley's wile and guile, DeLon Wright is going to be better in that role than he was. If only for the fact that he's just longer. Wright is someone who you can like put out there on a guy like you can put out there on Halliburton or Jalen Brunson, even though they're younger and probably quicker. Like, he can make up for that with his length a bit. And then, like Jaylen Brown, a wing who maybe has a bit of size to him. Like, that's someone I trust to do that. So, like, I don't think he's going to be a flashy player offensively. I think he's going to more be a secondary ball handler. He's a 35% shooter from three for his career. I think that's fine, but I do think he is going to provide a lot of what was missing to this team last year. So now that brings me to Taurean Prince at the very end here. And I was also a fan of this move too. I think, like, you hear from people like, your national podcasts, they do talk about how the Bucks are, like, they really nailed it with their minimum signings this offseason. And in previous years, the Bucks really, Semi Ojeleye, Rodney Hood, didn't always go too well.
Some of the greats to have worn the jersey. Okay, come on.
Yeah, outside of like
Malik Beasley.
Yeah, outside of, I would say, Wesley Matthews, like, there really weren't too many great minimum signings over the years, unless you want to count. I guess you could kind of count Javon Carter, but yeah, just not a. It makes sense. Like, it's not really a good way to build your team. Look at what the Phoenix Suns tried to do last year. They, with Eric Gordon and all those guys, like, it just didn't work too well. But this year they're doing a little better with it. Anyway, so Crowder, of course, one of those minimum signings as well. But like, I just want to put this out there, just because I know you'll appreciate this, and I know our friend Kyle Carr will appreciate this. Yeah. This is what Jay Crowder did in the postseason with the Bucks. Two postseason series. I don't know offhand. I guess I can look really quick and see how many playoff games he played. But 83 playoff minutes, and he was benched a few of those games. Like he did not get off the bench, I think, in Game 6 of the Pacers series last year, right?
Yep.
And he and Bud certainly benched him too. And it was funny to see like there was such an anti-Bud sentiment at the time, where everyone was like, what the hell, Bud? Like, this is your big trade acquisition. You've been benching him, and everyone was taking Crowder's side, kind of like when Crowder was grousing a bit about like, I don't understand, like why wasn't, like, I don't get what my role is. It's like, dude, you sucked, and and people were taking his side just because they didn't like Bud, but you saw that goodwill completely evaporate this year. So okay, 83 playoff minutes. It's bad, folks. 6 of 25 from the field. That's 24%. 1 of 13 from 3. That's 7.7%. But the most damning, and this is, again, like, you looked game by game at the plus minuses, and he played 8 total playoff games, 4 in each year. So he did, get benched for one game, 2 games in one series. Outscored by 43 points in 83 minutes, the Bucks were when he was on the floor. Talk about torpedoing your career when you hold out. Like, you're mad because you're losing your starting spot to Cam Johnson or whatever it was. I get it, but you know what? Like, show up and play, because this is what happens. You come back and you're not the player you were. You're not the player you were the previous season, and you certainly aren't the player that you were the 2 seasons prior in the NBA Finals, which is the player that the Bucks thought that they were getting, and we all hoped they were getting, and they just did not. So Jay Crowder is gone. He's worked out for the Kings this week. We'll see. Taurean Prince is in, really, to fill that role. Taurean Prince is not quite as bulky, but similar size. Younger, has, I think, it's certainly a better shooter. Like, not as streaky of a shooter throughout his career. I think he's about 37% shooter from 3, and he's been up around 40 in recent years. I also talked with Jacob Rude, who is my counterpart over at Silver Screen and Roll, the Lakers affiliate. Just trying to figure out, what was going on between him and Darvin Ham last year, because Lakers fans just hated how much run that he was getting, and I understand it. Like, he was taking time away from, I guess, like Jared Vanderbilt or Rui Hachimura or whoever, Austin Reeves, like better younger players. I get it. And Darvin Ham was not well regarded on that team, in large part because of how he handled the starting lineup, and just never really settled on one. Anyway, both those guys are in Milwaukee right now. We love Darvin Ham in Milwaukee, and I think he's a lot like, just talking to people I know who follow the Lakers, like, they just think he's not a NBA head coach material, which not everyone is. Some people are outstanding assistants, and they get the big role, like Adrian Griffin, and they just like cannot do it. But just talking with Jacob a bit about, and you can read the conversation we had, the Q&A, I should say, on Brew Hoop. So Prince has a few particularities that maybe might remind you of Jay Crowder. Like, forget about the hair, not talking about the hair or the size. So not physical things as much, but like Taurean Prince is not a good rebounder. He's never been
allergic to it.
He's never been a good rebounder. And to be fair, like, the Bucks don't need that. They don't need like a primary wing defender off the bench, guy who's guarding big wings. They don't necessarily need him to be like an elite rebounder or something like that. And who knows? Maybe being around Brook Lopez, he finds more that just like appear in his lap.
Hands,
yeah. But like, okay, so that's one similarity you don't really like to see. But defensively, like Jacob was saying, he's maybe not the type of guy he's not the type of guy you want to trust on guards, which makes sense. And the Bucks thankfully have someone for that with DeLon Wright, and I think Gary Trent Jr. will be, and also guys who are returning like Andre Jackson Jr. Like these are the guys we want out there dealing with Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Maxey and Tyrese Halliburton. But when it comes to larger wings, the going back to the PJ Tucker role, yeah, he is still trustworthy with it. And unlike Jay Crowder, he's been doing it, and he's had some good moments in more recent playoff seasons. Like I think it was 2 years ago that the Lakers and the Pelicans met up in the play-in game, and Taurean Prince. No, that was when Taurean Prince was on the Timberwolves. Still, but they were playing the Pelicans, and he totally shut down. I mean, he I think it was both him and McDaniels who were dealing with Ingram and Zion Williamson, and they just had terrible games. That was the Patrick Beverley thumping his chest on the scores table game. I think. No, like Taurean Prince had Ingram in jail, and he did a great job on Zion too. So yeah, more recent and impressive playoff defensive just accolades or just credibility that I think than Crowder, who didn't play basketball for like most of a year,
mostly
like 9 months or something like that. So I have more optimism he can be the wing defender they need. I think there are, and I certainly think he'll be a better shooter than Crowder was. So he's filling a role that they need. That they're always going to probably need someone to fill when they have, just a team. Every team kind of needs a guy like that. I mean, there's a sort of bigger wing off the bench who can defend and hit some threes. I'm optimistic that this will work better. But of the three guys, who are coming in to fill roles, I guess he's the one I have just the most question marks about.
I would tend to agree. It's very interesting when I think about Taurean Prince. When he ended up like in Minnesota, I just assumed, I was like, oh, his career must be coming to a close. One, I thought he was a lot older than he is.
He seems like he's older. Yeah. He's been around for a while.
He has. And once because he went from Brooklyn to Cleveland, right? And then he eventually ended up in, if I remember correctly.
And he started in Atlanta.
Yes, and he was great in Atlanta. He was great under Bud.
He was with Bud, for a year or two, I think.
So before like the Minnesota stint, or even during the Minnesota stint, I was like, oh, this is probably like Taurean Prince's last stand. And then he ends up in the Lakers, and Darvin Ham falls in love with them, and they kind of just roll with it. So it's an interesting arc that he's been on.
He probably kind of resurrected his career a little bit, I think, with the Timberwolves. So he should be around for a few more years yet. Hopefully this isn't the start of his decline. He's only 30. He's only 30.
Yeah. I think, like you said, the main point with Prince is he would actively have to try to be worse than Jay Crowder was. So long as he's not out there trying to be worse, I feel like that is an upgrade. And I think all three guys in their own specific ways will represent upgrades. This is why it's interesting. Even like on NBA.com, they had the 30 teams in 30 days exercises, like minor roster adjustments. I'm like, I know they're still like role guys, but come on, they're like all three of them were upgrades over who they're replacing.
I think all three of them are significant upgrades. The only upgrade I would say would probably be like the upgrade I would say would be the smallest would be from Pat Bev to Wright. I think that's a big thing people are underrating with the Bucks this year. It's just how much better the middle of their roster is. It might have been Justin Garcia who was saying this, but and I said this too. I wrote this and talked about this. After they lost to Indiana and just coming into to free agency, like the Bucks need to make the middle of their roster better. Like spots, you talk about spots 5 through 8 or 9 or whatever, however you want to put it. They needed to just get more from those players, those role players, those 20 to 25 minute a game guys, and I really like who they've brought in now. I think they really they've made big upgrades at all those spots, and those aren't flashy upgrades. I get it, but I think they can be. I think they could be sneaky impactful.
Yep, I agree. It feels like the best slate we've had in a very long time. So hats off to you yet again, John Horst. Assuming they all work out, I think they at least some of them will. Okay, here's three guys that nobody needs to worry about wondering what's their role going to be. How are they going to fit? These are three well-known players that I want you to rank in terms of their importance to the season. You'll know these names: Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez. Most important to least important, or do it in reverse order if you like.
I'm actually gonna take a little different tack to this than the others have. I'm gonna divide it up by the regular season and the postseason because they're different answers. In the regular season, and I think this is something others have said. I want to say Justin or maybe Camille said this. Is that in the regular season, like Brook Lopez is a lot more important in the regular season, and some maybe say you might say he's the most important, and that's what I'm going to say too. Of those three, just because of what he means to the defense. Even at age 36, like athleticism has never been the reason, at least while he's been a Buck, the reason why he is a good defender or an elite defender, as we saw 2 years ago. It's because he's huge, and it's because he knows what the hell he's doing out there in the court. Like he's got absolutely fantastic court vision. I mean, there aren't many players. I learned this, when the Bucks acquired Serge Ibaka, who had also great defensive credentials coming into Milwaukee, and I thought, hey, he can probably do what Lopez does, right? Like he was a great defensive player in OKC. Not just anyone can do what Brook Lopez does. Not just anyone can backpedal into the paint and with their peripheral vision, like be able to and their giant size, be able to check two players, a roller and a ball handler, until someone recovers.
Even the great DeMarcus Cousins struggled in this role as well.
yeah. Cousins. Who were some other bigs that year? They had Luke Cornett, who NBA champion Luke Cornett played. I think he played just 2 or 3 minutes. He was a COVID addition.
Yes, he was. Yep.
Yeah. So it's. I think that is something though that is not going to just leave him with age. Everyone's talking about how he's older, and he's he's lost. Let's say he's lost a step. It's how much of a step do you have to begin with? For one, he's still big. Human beings don't start shrinking until their 70s, maybe their 80s.
Well, he'll probably still be on the roster long enough for us to find out, but but not yet.
Hey,
not
man,
yet. You're right.
I would be happy to I think next off season, they can re-sign him to really any contract with his bird rights. If he's still playing well, and if they don't have, maybe even if they do have a long-term answer at center by that point, who knows? Well, what the roster will look like this time next year. I am for bringing back Lopez on a smaller contract. You can give him some 1-year deals. You can pay him, $5 to $6 million. The cap is going up like crazy next offseason. Mm-hmm. It's projected to go up 10% in these next several years. I mean, that new media deal, the salary cap is going to be $154 million next year. It's going to be by 2028 over $200 million. A $10 million contract isn't going to look that bad anymore. Anyway, that's beside the point. I think that Brook Lopez is still, I think, as long as he's, on the court, his back seems to be great. Whoever that surgeon was, man,
that's off to you.
That's where I want to go.
Value for the money. Yeah.
if I ever have back problems, that's where I want to go. So, I think we're going to see a lot of what we're used to from Lopez this year. It's just gonna he's going to be, as others have said, he's going to be not in jail as much as he's been the last,
Mhm.
like as he was last year, where like all of a sudden, like I think y'all were comparing him to those Jazz teams with Rudy Gobert, where it's all of a sudden like there's no perimeter resistance, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh God, I have to clean up this disaster. Yeah,
Or
just
he's getting switched out and he's like, all right, I'm guarding a 6'1" guard. It's just me
Yeah.
1-on-1 on the perimeter with this guy right now. Yeah.
Remember how well he did on, this was obviously a few years ago, but remember the NBA Finals? He did a great job on Chris Paul. Like switching on to Chris Paul. So maybe he can still handle like a 36-year-old.
It's in his bag. Yes.
When they're playing the Spurs, switch it up.
When we're playing the Spurs in the finals and we have to put Chris Paul in hell again, then Brook Lopez is going to be ready for his moment.
No problem.
Yeah.
So I think, just to the defense and like getting this defense back to respectability. I mean, others have said it too. It's like, I think Jackson was saying, it's like the Bucks need to at least be a top 10-ish. Like I would say they need to be an above average defense for sure next year to like be a legit like championship threat. Can they do it? Yeah, I think they have the personnel to do it for sure. I think Doc, at least, he knows how to like create and employ a defensive scheme for this team, because Adrian Griffin just could not do that. So that problem, I think, will take care of itself to an extent. And I hope that, I don't know if we'll see them be a top 10 defense, but I think an above average defense is, I hope is going to happen. And Brook Lopez will be a part of that. Okay, after Brook, it's going to be Dame. I think one thing I'll say about Dame is just with the way that the roster looks right now, as long as we've got some, as people are healthy, as long as Chris Middleton is not missing a month as he has the last two seasons, and Giannis is playing with the now middle of the roster pieces we're talking about, like Gary Trent and DeLon Wright, whoever. I want, like, this is a little bit of a hot take, but I think if Damian Lillard were to have the same season as he had last year, which we can all agree based on his career numbers, and even like his final season in Portland was a little bit of a letdown. Now I don't think that's just a regular season. Like his postseason was amazing. Like to me that washes away whatever, like however short he came up at times during the regular season. I mean, the Bucks would have gotten swept without him. Like, and he was sensational in a few of those games. But my point is, if Lillard were to like, just be do what he did last year, which was 25 points a game, 35% from three or so, which is again way low for him. I want to say he shot maybe like 41, 42% from the field. So not super efficient, but, got to the line a lot. If he has a season like that again, I still think the Bucks with the team right now, as long as they're healthy, are an easy 50-win team. That's my maybe. Okay, maybe that's not as hot of a take. I don't know. You seem nonplussed by that.
I mean, they weren't that far off the pace, and last year had a lot of disastrous undertones going on. I mean, they had a strong first half of the season just in terms of wins loss. Obviously, everything going off the court was not helping.
With a really easy schedule, yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said for stability, and again, if the efficiency is up a little bit for Dame, I mean, the fact that hopefully we'll get a little bit more of equilibrium between him and Giannis and Chris. Like I said, if all three of them are out there a decent amount, as you would hope to expect, I don't think it's that crazy to say they'd be able to get. That's why I found it very strange. What's like the first Vegas line was like, oh, it's like 49 and a half wins. I was like, or whatever. It might even been lower than that. I was like, that feels like really low for some reason.
Most recent line I saw was 50.5. ESPN project them at 49, same record as they had last year. I really think, I mean, barring major injury problems, I think just so many of the problems from last year are going to take care of themselves with, the fact that the coaching situation is much more stable. The roster fits together, like at least on paper, a whole lot better. And that's another reason why I say that's like if Dame is still just kind of looking like sort of meh, like I think in the regular season the Bucks will be okay. But at the same time, I think Lillard is going to be a lot better this year. I mean, I don't think. Okay, so he's 33, I believe. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago, earlier this week. I think it was Lockdown Bucks. They were doing a crossover with Lockdown Knicks guys and Camille, and then we're talking. It's like look at some of the point guards that Damian Lillard is often compared to. Obviously, Steph Curry, his contemporaries, Chris Paul. These guys are still like effective elite players into their late 30s. Chris Paul is 38 now. He's a great backup point guard. Steph Curry is still one of the best. I think one of the best 5 players in the NBA at age 30. I think he's 36. He has such a similar game to Dame, right? And Steph Curry had, I would say, way more injury concerns throughout his career and in recent years than Dame has had. Dame missed some time. I think it was an ab thing. Yeah, it was an abdominal thing a few years ago. Like 2 or 3 years ago, he only played maybe like 28 games or something like that. Last year in Portland, they shut him down towards the end of the year. He had some lower body stuff then, and he had some lower body stuff last year. But like, what was the injury that Steph Curry had in that 19-20 year, like the year after KD left, and while that was the first year that Klay Thompson was hurt. That was the ACL, I guess, or was that Achilles? I don't know. Regardless, like he played like 3 games that year. And look at him since he's been back.
Wasn't it his hand? Didn't he break something in his hand? Wasn't that what it was?
Might have been.
His finger
oh yeah.
Then it was like he had to come back and had to work through like whatever. I think it was a broken hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, similarly to Dame, like these were not lower body injuries. I think that he's had Curry's. I mean, the back half of his career has obviously been outstanding. I'm not suggesting that Dame is gonna like look like
say it MVP campaign. Say it. I know you want to. Come on.
Not gonna happen, but I think he's. I don't think you. I think a lot of people are assuming he's washed or he's like on the down. Maybe not washed. I don't think a lot of people are saying that, but are a lot of people saying he's on the downslope, the downslope of his career, and that might be true. But like what they were saying on that pod the other day is like the way that things are going right now with NBA players, like just how you can talk about modern medicine or athletic training or just how teams take care of their players. Guys are like this are still plenty effective into their mid to late 30s. So I think we could see some really great years ahead for Lillard. Maybe not going to be like prime years in Portland, but the Bucks don't need that. So all right, Lillard's my second guy, and then of course Middleton's the last guy for the regular season. I just think the Bucks like look at the 2022-23 season. He played like 30 some games. The Bucks won, I think it was 58 games in the regular season. And last year he played, I think 50. He played like 54, 55 games. And wasn't an outstanding regular season. Obviously an outstanding postseason. But I think if Chris Middleton plays between 50 and 65 games and is just putting up like 15 points a game and shooting like maybe like 46, 38 from the field, and going like 15 like and five assists, and he's getting some rebounds too. That's outstanding. That's all they need from him, especially with some of the other firepower they have in this team. Now, my different spin on this answer is who are the important, rank these players in terms of importance to the postseason. Number one there is definitely Damian Lillard. If Damian Lillard plays like we saw him in game 1 of that Pacers series, if he has a few games like that in this postseason, and Giannis is healthy, and they don't have, I mean, even if Chris Middleton is maybe missing some time, the Bucks are in really good shape. The Bucks are in really good shape if they have that Damian Lillard, who we saw about, I guess, 4 months ago at Fiserv Forum, dropping 30 in the first round, the first game of a playoff series. If he's doing that with regularity in a postseason series or in just throughout the course of a postseason, the Bucks are going to go very deep as long as Giannis is healthy. So he's
that's
number one.
Folks. I just want that's basketball analysis is what that is. If they
very,
that's what you come to this podcast for. I think I remember after that game, I did the instant reaction. I was like, if Damian Lillard is going to average 30 on that efficiency, we're going to win some games. That's basketball analysis.
You're right. It does sound really basic,
but still, no, it's a
I
good
don't
point
think
to
people,
make. It's true. Yeah.
I don't think people are really considering that. I think people are just thinking he's old and like he was not good last year.
They think he's walking around with like a walker. He's not mobile.
They just think that's who he is now. It's like I'm not ready to say that's who he is. I mean, he's 33. He's got a much better. He had an actual off season this year. He's training with the ultra marathon guy. I mean,
David Goggins. Yet another shout out to David Goggins.
I know. I knew I had to bring him up on this podcast.
Thank you.
We brought him up on every podcast. I just forgot his name. He needs to. I mean, we're probably
we could probably get him on the podcast too. To be perfect.
I'm sure we could. And if we brought him up on every podcast, I feel like we should be getting some sort of windfall from him. Anyway, so Lillard's number one. Number two is going to be Chris Middleton. Again, like if he, this is not the same hard hitting basketball analysis that I just delivered on Damian Lillard, but he doesn't need to have 40-point games in a series.
It's nice if he does. I'm not going to be mad if he does.
Of course not. But he doesn't need to do that if Dame's doing his thing and Giannis is healthy. So Chris Middleton, I think he is just based on because of the way he plays the game. All of the classic things like he's a good isolation scorer. He shoots the mid range very well. He can run a half court offense. These are things the Bucks really could have used in that Celtics series in 2022. The things he's good at. He does those things. That's that means so much more to a team in the postseason than it does in the regular season. And then Lopez, just he's the Bucks will in certain matchups they'll need to go small. Brook Lopez has been on the floor a lot in postseason matchups over the years for the Bucks. I think there was a lot of people were sort of retroactively saying in 2021 when they were going for the title, he was not really on the floor in the big moments at the end he was on the floor in overtime of the Brooklyn game in Game 7. What did he do at the very end of that game that almost cost it? I forgot. He had a turnover or something. Or a bad foul?
So it was God, I can't remember either. But yes, I do remember.
It didn't matter. The good thing is we don't remember because it didn't matter. But my point is he was on the floor. He was on the floor a lot in the finals. Going small in the postseason hasn't been as big of a deal for the Bucks as maybe we think it's been. And we'll see how much that continues this year. I mean, Giannis at the 5 lineups are going to be important against some teams, but hello, if they play the Sixers finally, they're going to need a lot of Brook Lopez. And I mean, even like the Cavs, they're definitely going to need Brook Lopez. It's just they're not going to need him to be they won't need him to take on as much of an offensive load as they do as they might want him to do in the regular season. At least I hope they don't. In the last couple postseasons, he's had to do a lot more offensively than he really should need to, just because Giannis has been hurt or Chris Middleton's been hurt.
You're in hell when you're in Game 5 of the first round series. You're like, man, let's get Brook posting up.
Yeah,
let's mix it. we got to mix it up a little bit.
You don't want that to be. You don't want that to be your best option. You want that to be a plan C.
Yes.
You plan C. You want that to be a plan C at best. Yeah. So yeah, defensively, he's going to be really important in some matchups in the postseason. In some, he's not going to be. That's just how it's been his entire tenure, and that's the kind of the life of an NBA center these days. So okay, regular season, Brooke, Dame, Chris, postseason, Dame, Chris, Brooke. That's my
Beautiful.
answer. My long-winded answer.
Good original answer on that. Okay. And we're going to cut it off there for part 1. We start getting into the weaknesses of the team at the start of the next episode, but we appreciate your listening to this part 1 of my interview with Fan, managing editor of Brew Hoop. As always, like, subscribe, send to your friends, etc., etc. The second part will be out tomorrow, and we thank you guys for listening.